What's going on, everybody? It is Bush Fishing, and we are back. Today we're going to be working on my EVINRUDE 75 horse. Now, if you guys haven't followed along in the last video, I got the carbs off and I got them soaking because they were super dirty, and the reason I'm not finishing up that video is because the carbs are still soaking and I'm going to let them, and I wanted to run the heat today. So basically, this motor was given to me, not given to me, I bought it, and basically it sat for a while. Trim tilt didn't work. I forgot to record that, well, I just really didn't, but I made a custom trim tilt harness, which, let's pull this old cowl off. So basically I made a custom trim tilt harness, runs up the side of the motor. We have two relays back here, and basically from the factory you only have your trim tilt controls in the remote, which is over there. And what I did was I added an extra harness here, so now I have controls back here as well as up there, and that's pretty much up to speed. This motor had a no spark when I first got it, and it ended up being in the key switch. There's a ground wire coming from ground to the switch, a pin, and then from that to the neutral safety switch, and basically the wires were chafed from the bolt going through that holds the two halves of the controls together, and it was grounding out ignition at all times. So once I fixed that, we got this thing to spark, but I wanted to clean the carbs before I run it, because it needs to be ran with 50 to 1, and if you run a two-stroke without oil in the gas, you'll just mess something up. But I have no idea the health of the impeller, so I already ordered an impeller kit right here. There's your part number if you want to get it. This actually came off of Amazon because I didn't want to spend a lot. But in today's video, we're going to be dropping the lower unit and showing you guys how to change the impeller on your 75 horse. This does cover pretty much 65 to 75 or any real EVINRUDE 3-cylinder. So to begin with, we're going to start at the top. The hardest thing to do is, hopefully you can see this, but right there is your gear selector linkage. There's one bolt in it. It doesn't bolt all the way through, but it's basically a pin to hold the shift rod in. That is going to come out first, and then the rest of it is lickety split. Getting it out isn't hard, getting it in is kind of hard, which is why I actually have a cameraman today. Whether or not I forced him to do this, yeah, we'll leave that. But once we get that out, we can undo the bolts in the lower unit and basically drop it. I already have the gear case drained, so we're going to start off with that one bolt. I'm going to grab a 7/16 open wrench. I have a lot more room because the carbs are off. This can be hard, but it is possible. So I'm going to grab my wrench and we'll get to it. Alright, so 7/16 open wrench. Hopefully you can see this a little better. Here is where your shift rod comes up down below, and it basically gets sandwiched in here, and this pin is what holds it up. So 7/16 wrench, and we're going to take it all the way out, being super careful not to drop it. But once we get this out, we'll come back and we'll continue on with removing the lower unit. Alright, so now that we got it threaded unthreaded, you'll see it's only threaded on half and the rest of it is a pin. This is what the shift rod pivots on when it goes up and down. So now that we have that off, we can move down to the lower unit. Alright, so next you're going to need a 9/16 wrench. You're going to be using the open end. If you look down here, I have it trimmed up because of course my trim tilt is working now, but there's 4 bolts here, 1, 2, and 2 on the other side, and I believe there is the last hidden bolt under here, but we'll see about that later. Basically, just go through, and this lower unit's never been off because the original paint is on the heads of these, but oh yeah, since these have never been off, I'm going to assume that's why these are so stiff. Okay, so you can kind of half-ass get a wrench on there. I wouldn't recommend this, but since it's working for now, this is how we're going to do it, because my wrench was slipping. Again, you probably won't have these problems, but I am, because this lower unit's never been off. So those 2 are cracked loose. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. And then we're going to fully remove 3 of them, but we're going to leave one on because I don't yet know if the whole lower unit's going to fall off. Alright, so it turns out there is another hidden bolt. I was actually just too lazy to fucking bend over. But if you look down here, not at the anode, but down further down. Normally there's something covering it, but 5/8 bolt. I still have one of the other 4 in, but I'm going to start loosening this. And I want the last one to be in the corner so I can catch it when I'm done. That was it. Okay, so now you'll see how long this bolt is. That's the one that was holding it. Alright, so as you can see there actually is another bolt under the anode, so there's 2 under here, which is weird. My other one didn't have that, but it's going, is it going to be a 1/2 inch or 7/16? I think it's a 1/2 inch. Yeah, 1/2 inch down there, 7/16 to pull the anode off. Same thing. We're not cavemen anymore. Look how much easier that was. So that one's a little 1/2-inch bolt. You can see there's a little lock washer on it. Now this is still glued. Oh, you can see that it's already coming loose. So, okay, so now that this bolt is loose down here, I'm going to give her a couple love taps, and you'll see right there, it's already splitting. Just like that. So, that looks like there's my shit in there. I'm going to keep getting this bolt out until it's ready to come out. And then now that the case is fully cracked, once I get this bolt out, I'll be ready to catch it and take it down. So, now that this is out, give her some more hits, wiggle it around a little bit. Just be really careful if you're doing this vertical, because it will drop on your feet. There she goes. So, holy crap, there's some nice shit in the exhaust housing. But what you're going to do is pull straight out, trying not to bend the drive shaft. Once you get to the shift rod, you're going to have to pull a little bit because that angle point is coming out of a boot. But now I'm going to get this thing on the bench and we'll be ready to do the impeller. Alright, so I'm actually going to set you guys in the motor. We're going to get to taking this water pump apart. It's been a few days. I want to get this back together so I have the room to get the carbs back together. So, to begin with, I'm going to use a 1/4-inch ratchet and a 3/8. So we're going to take the 4 bolts around. I'm not going to bother taking the water tube out because the new one comes with one. So 3/8, take all 4 bolts out, and then we'll pull the entire housing up and see what kind of damage we got in here. So there's our 4 bolts. Now we can lift up on this, and when you do that, here's the key. This is the key that holds the impeller in place. You're going to put that aside. Make sure not to lose that. So there is a fair bit of stuff in there, but oh yeah, look at that. So I'll put the housing to the side for a second so we can look at the impeller. So if you take a look at this, first of all, the blades have taken a set, which means they don't come back. The plastic's all cracked on them, and you can actually see where they're worn on the side here. So this is a really old impeller, and it's a good thing that we're changing it. Other than that, I mean, none of the fins broke off. That's the main thing you want to see. If fins are broken off, they could be shot up into the head of the motor, and that could cause a water blockage and make you overheat. But all of ours are still intact. Coming down to the housing, this is the housing. So we have an O-ring around the side, which is completely flattened out. That needed to be replaced. And you can see, putting my fingernail across the actual metal that it rubs against, nothing's really too grooved, so that's good, but you can definitely see it is worn, so this is all getting replaced. So in our new kit over here, we got O-ring, gaskets, obviously we have the impeller, the cup that goes into the impeller housing, we have the housing itself, which is new plastic, and then we have the bottom pump plate, and we also get new hardware, new bolts. So we need to get this plate up and the gasket below it, and then we can clean up and start installing. So lift up on the plate, and it's kind of weird, there's no gasket behind it. So I'm going to grab a little screwdriver and actually clean up all this mud and stuff that's in here. Okay, so now with all that kind of cleaned up, I'm going to make sure that the entire mounting area where this pump sits on is flat. No grooves in it or anything. And we're going to start putting this new water pump together. So, okay, so the cup that goes into the impeller housing has a tab on it right here, and it has another tab on the bottom here. Those are going to line up there and there. So, make sure it's going in even, and it should drop right in and fully seat to where it's flush with the housing. Now that we have that done, I'm going to grab the O-ring that goes around it. Okay, now that that gasket's in, we're going to start on the bottom. So, first of all, paper gasket. That lines up good. Make sure your bolt holes are all lined up and they're going to work. Next up, bottom plate. Sometimes these have a smooth edge and a rough edge, which this does. I'm going to put smooth edge up. Slide that over the drive shaft all the way down. Make sure everything's still lining up. Okay, so once you have the impeller slid over, I'm going to put a little bit of this 2,4-C on. And what that's going to let me do is actually stick them to the drive shaft. So that's probably going to be the hardest part, but the new keys are different than the old keys. So basically you stick the key onto the drive shaft and you slide the impeller opening over the key, and you can see I can hold the impeller and twist the drive shaft, and it doesn't come loose. If it goes backwards, then we're kind of in some shit, but we're going to keep moving. Glad I figured that out. Next up, we're going to need to take this impeller housing with our O-ring in it. Okay, so now with that bit of grease on there, the cup's going to want to come out, but it shouldn't be able to. We're going to very delicately slide the housing over, and once it touches the impeller, hopefully it's not going to touch that O-ring and rip it off, but we're going to twist the drive shaft clockwise while pushing down on the housing, and just like that, the fins of the impeller should squeeze in and let you get the housing all the way down, which it looks like it did. Now, this is an important part. I'm going to check the O-ring, and I can already see that it's squeezed out. Okay, so now that that is actually all compacted within the housing itself, I'm going to leave the housing right there, and I'm going to put some more grease on the O-ring, and we're going to do the same thing, but now just using this to align the housing on. They do make something called Super Lube that would obviously be recommended for this, but I don't have any here, so I'm going to be using grease. So same as before, very delicately slide this over. Keep coming down. It should grab on to where it needs to be with the cup. And hopefully, like that, we should have it on. Now, go all the way around, make sure your O-ring didn't squeeze out. But with that being done, the hard part should be over, and now we can bolt all of this together. If your gaskets are aligned and everything, you should be able to drop these in the hole and get them to start threading. Now we're going to run down all four. The torque sequence for this is going to be corner to corner, and then one last one all the way around just to make sure. You want this to squeeze really flat so you don't leak water. Obviously it's going to be underwater, so it doesn't matter if you leak water, but you're going to lose that water pressure going up to the motor. Now we will grab our ratchet, which it looks like the new bolts are 7/16. 7/16. So I'm going to run all four of these down, just snug them down, corner to corner, snugging them down. So now with all four snug down, it's nice and flat. I'm going to go corner to corner. These do not need to be crazy tight. Just do them. I'm doing them with a 1/4-inch ratchet till they stop. You can crack the plastic housing or snap a bolt off in there. So corner to corner, they're all tight. I'm just going to go one more time to make sure everything's even. Now the housing's down. So next up, you'll have a seal like this in your kit. Looks just like this. It's got an opening on the bottom that slides over the drive shaft and goes over the top of the housing. Just like that. Make sure it's seated all the way. Next up, there's a smaller, fully rubber seal. That's going to go inside the water outlet tube. You're going to put that in first, and then you're going to put the water outlet tube on top of it. And next is another one of these short bolts. Should be same size, 7/16. This one, go real light on just until it stops. Pretty much the last thing we got to do is install this in the boat. Alright, so this is where things are going to get interesting, because I'm alone and I need to align the shift rod while holding this motor up, while holding this lower end in. So hopefully you guys can see the shift rod is on an angle. Not on an angle, but it's perfectly perpendicular. It's going west if you're looking up the front of the... How the fuck do you explain that? Anyway, I have the controls in forward, and I have this in forward. That's going to give us a little more room, but the main thing is it's going to allow me to spin the props. It's going to let me spin the prop to spin the drive shaft to align the splines. Before I do that, I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the splines of the drive shaft at the top. That just ensures that it doesn't seize up in there and that we can get it out next time. I'm also going to put a little bit at the top of the water outlet. That's going to help it slide in a little easier. Now, let's get to it. So, you're going to have to really shove the gear selector up the shift tube and just keep shoving. So, water outlet tube just went up. You can hear that I'm hitting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spin the prop. Just like that. went into the flywheel. Not the flywheel, the bottom of the crank. Now this is where things get interesting. Okay, so it went up almost the entire way. What I'm going to do is trim this down, and hopefully the bottom of the stand is going to do it. Otherwise, my other idea... Okay, so that's holding the lower unit up. My other idea was take a ratchet strap around the lower unit up to the top. So hopefully you guys can see this. The shift rod right there is not where it needs to be. It needs to be in those grooves right there. So I'm going to take a pick, spin it. Hopefully it's going to go up into the grooves. It should still be in forward with how high up it is. But this is where things get difficult and hard to film. So I'll show you after I do that. Okay, so that was so much more difficult than it would ever need to be. But now that we've got that done, putting it back together, I'll show you how I did it in a second. But for now, I'm going to get this put back together, bolted up. Ah, that was such a pain, but we finally got it. You'd think I'd be good at it with how many times I had to do it on my old motor, because it was missing the bushings that go through the motor. And shifting would never align, but we got it now. So I'm going to get the 4 bolts in here, 2 hidden ones, and then the anode put back on. And then we will be ready to wrap this one up. Alright, everybody. So my apologies for the end of that being really bad. It's really hard to film being one person, but what I ended up having to do is take the cotter pin off of here for the shift linkage so this arm could move freely. That arm moves that directly. So once I did that, everything was moving super freely and I was able to get the shift rod in, and then I had to mess with the shift rod cable, the shift cable. I had to adjust it a little bit, but now it goes in forward, neutral, reverse, and that's pretty much it. I might play a little clip at the end of this video once I get this thing running, but for now, obviously I gotta get the carbs back on, put together. So I'm going to clean up and finish that video, and then hopefully you'll see a clip of this thing shooting some water out the back. But if this helped at all, hopefully you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe. I hope that this helped a little bit. You kind of see how to take everything off. Putting it back together was the same way as taking it off. But hopefully we're going to get this thing on the water, and make sure to stay tuned if you want to see more boat building videos, because this is going to be a big part of that. We're going to see how fast it goes, stuff like that, and catch a lot of fish off of it. But for now, I'm going to go finish the other video, and we will see you guys in the next one. I'm going to use the primer and let's see if she starts.